Welcome into another episode of my Dynasty Fantasy Football YouTube. Today I'm looking at some 2025 Dynasty sells. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's go. So, I feel like a broken record, but I feel like we have to bring up George Pickens again. Now, why? I think we've seen time and time again that Pickens cannot be the alpha wide receiver one for a solid NFL offense. And remember, we're turning to 2025 Dynasty sells. The fantasy season is over. So when we're talking about why players are sells now, we're mostly focusing on bad things that could happen to that player in either free agency or the NFL draft. That's going to be the majority of reasons why these players are sells for the next few months. So for Pickens this year, 58 catches, 900 yards, 3 touchdowns, 97 targets, 4.6 catches, and 69.2 yards per game. Really not much improved from 2023. And that's without any target competition in the wide receiver room. Deontay Johnson left and was not replaced at all. And Russell Wilson was still better than most of what they got from Kenny Pickett in 2023. Pickens averaged just 12.6 PPR points per game, 35th among wide receivers. Nothing special this year. Could get some touchdown regression in his favor, but that still wouldn't get him that high in the fantasy ranks. However, it's not really his play on the field, although I do have some concerns about his off-field kind of antics, a lot of that stuff. I'm not loving that. But the main issues are wide receiver competition is incoming and quarterback play is unlikely to improve. So I have seen consistently almost every mock draft has the Steelers taking either Emeka Egbuka or Isaiah Bond in the first round. These are 2 players, 2 wide receivers, right in that late first range. I see that happening, very likely happening. The Steelers also have $53 million in 2025 cap space. Now, they're probably going to have to use some of that on re-signing Russell Wilson, but they're re-signing him. They can structure the deal in a way that it's not going to have a big cap hit in year 1. So they're going to have plenty of space to use it on a veteran wide receiver. What's not going to happen again is that Calvin Austin, Mike Williams, and Van Jefferson are going to combine as wide receiver too. I mean, Roman Wilson is also there. Who knows what he's going to develop into, but they're not repeating this. They tried to get Brandon Ayuk. We know that. If they had gotten Brandon Ayuk, who knows what would have happened. And as I was saying, Russell Wilson is the Steelers' likely 2025 starter quarterback. There's no path for them really to improve. There are 2 quarterbacks in the draft worth a high pick. Steelers are not getting those guys. So if they're not getting those guys, and the likely outcome is they're re-signing Russell Wilson. And do we think that Wilson is going to be better at 37, going to age 37 season than he was this year? I'm not expecting Wilson to improve, become better next year. That I'm not expecting at all. So if I'm not expecting that, then there's going to be more target competition. And George Pickens wasn't that fantasy special this year. What's going to happen next year? Why is it going to get better? The answer is I don't really think it is. So if I don't think it is, then we have to look at how we're going to sell George Pickens. So the way to sell George Pickens is for assets that are maybe people are not in on. So here's one I saw in the Dynasty Day Trade database, and I am limited on my data from there because there's not a lot of trades going on right now. A lot of leagues are locked. So these videos are going to have a lot more of my own ideas. But this one was from there. George Pickens in a second for Brock Purdy in Superflex. In Superflex, I would much rather have Brock Purdy. Much rather Brock Purdy, the Superflex quarterback asset, over George Pickens in a second. Let's say mid. Another one, maybe a mid-second, George Pickens for Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson is much better at earning targets than George Pickens. That is sticky stat, and I would much rather have Garrett Wilson, who I just think is a far superior player to George Pickens. And then maybe George Pickens for Xavier Worthy. He probably can't do this anymore, but I'd give it a try. Maybe someone's still not as in on Xavier Worthy. There's a lot of options to sell George Pickens, but he's a player that makes me nervous. I would look for ways to move on from George Pickens because I don't think he's going to be worth as much in August as he is now. Now, my second player, Tyrone Tracy. So Tyrone Tracy did extremely well this year for a 5th rounder. He took the starting job for the Giants in week 5 and never really gave it back to Devin Singletary. But there are some major warning signs with Tyrone Tracy. So this year, overall, he had 178 carries, 780 yards, 5 touchdowns, 4.4 yards carry, 36 catches, 277 yards, and a touchdown. He got a bit involved in the first few weeks and then became a starter and, was solid. But did he do enough to remain the 2025 starter? He was fine, but not special, especially down the stretch. So I have a few issues with Tyrone Tracy. So he was an older rookie and turned 25 in November. It doesn't mean he can't be good, but the path for Tracy to gain a lot of dynasty value is thinner. We're never going to look at him as a young, years ahead of him running back. That's not going to be in Tracy's range of outcomes. So how high can he really get in dynasty value? He's not as high as a younger player. And then down the stretch, we had a problem. Tyrone Tracy, and it's not just the yards per carry, which were poor in any of his final 5 weeks, but during the middle of the year, he looked electric and exciting. And down the stretch, as a Giants fan myself, he didn't look the same. It looked okay, okay, but not someone that we're locked in as a starter with this guy. It felt more like, if I had to give some examples, it felt a little bit more like a Dameon Pierce type rookie year or a Elijah Mitchell than a Kyron Williams second year breakout or, that kind of thing where a day 3 pick, Kyron Williams, second year broke out. These day 3 players, when they have their breakouts, it's hard because, even like Chuba Hubbard was replaced and then only kept the job because Jonathan Brooks got injured again and was out for way longer, and then contract extension, and then Brooks got a second injury. But it took all of those injuries, delays, and then another injury for Chuba Hubbard to really keep that job. And the real danger is the new coaching staff and potential new general manager, because we see that the coaching staff, like with Dameon Pierce and with other day 3 running backs, can go away from these guys just because they don't like them, especially if they weren't that good, if they weren't good enough to be undeniable. So the Giants have plenty of cap space, $56 million in 2025 cap space. They have an extra 4th-round comp pick in the 2025 NFL draft. Devin Singletary, he struggled this year. He wasn't so good. And the Giants are stuck with him. But if Brian Daboll is gone, will the new regime see we have Tyrone Tracy and Devin Singletary? Are they going to say, well, that's good enough? Maybe. But, having Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders, despite the team being bad, did not stop the Panthers from drafting Jonathan Brooks. So I would not rule out the Giants from adding a relatively significant investment at the running back position. And this is a deep running back draft class. They could get someone with their early 3rd-round pick who is good. So with all of that said, I just have some concerns with Tyrone Tracy. I don't think this is a long-term asset. I think this is a good player, but not someone that we want to value extremely highly in Dynasty. So I did see a Dynasty Daddy trade for the 2027 first. I would just take that. I would take that. The 2027 first is going to rise in value over time. I would much rather have that over Tyrone Tracy. Then maybe you could sell him for Jerry Jeudy. I think people are down on Jerry Jeudy because of the last couple of weeks, but we saw Jerry Jeudy is a good player. I don't think Jerry Judy's going away, and he's almost the same age as Tyrone Tracy. And he's a wide receiver who lasts longer. So I'd rather just have Jerry Jeudy. And then maybe a buy low on Jaden Reed could be an option. People really don't like Jaden Reed. So if you could send Tracy in a 3rd for Jaden Reed, I'd consider that. Reed is a safer asset. Reed is not going away. He's going to be someone who's going to continue to be valued for a while, whereas Tyrone Tracy could literally not be worth much in a few months' time. So these are some options to move on from Tyrone Tracy, which I think I would look to do if I could get any of these types of prices. Now, if you like my YouTube content, you should sign up for the Patreon. Right now, I'm offering a 50% discount at all tiers using the code TylerYT. And I'm going to continue that for those watching on the YouTube. I'll keep reminding you of this code where you can click the link, patreon.com/fantasy advice up in the top right corner, and sign up for the Patreon. You get my rankings, access to Discord, and the ability to ask in advance questions for the YouTube videos, plus, DM advice, write-ups, anything else that I'm offering for premium subscribers. And tiers usually begin at $6 a month, but $3 a month for the first month with that discount and include all of those things. And I'm going to do another Patreon promo video probably the first week that there's no games to cover. So next week, I'm going to do regular YouTube content after week 18. And then after that, I think I'll move on to an off-season schedule where a greater percentage of my content will be for patrons only, especially during the quieter parts of the year where the YouTube algorithm doesn't favor Dynasty content as much. But I really hope people join again. It's been a hard road, I would say. And the fact, I think you can tell by the fact that I'm spending more and more time of these videos on the Patreon promo, should probably tell you that I'm having trouble getting people to sign up. So if you like the YouTube and want it to continue, the more people who sign up for the Patreon, the more likely that is to happen. So just saying, but with that being said, we'll move into my final player. So my final player, Jake Ferguson. So this is an oversimplification, but basically for fantasy football, there's two types of tight ends. Those who earn volume because they're so talented that teams give it to them and treat them like they're wide receivers. Maybe not in their positioning, but in terms of the way they earn targets, they're treated like wide receivers. These include Brock Bowers. Trey McBride is in that group. Prime Travis Kelce. Prime Mark Andrews. They're so good that they're a part of the team's receiving game plan. And, they're important in that way. Then there's the next group, which is they're a valued part of the team. The team likes these guys, but they mostly get receiving volume when wide receivers are either injured or non-existent. Who are good examples of these types of players? Cole Kmet. We've seen that now that wide receivers are there, Cole Kmet has disappeared. Cade Otton, wide receivers hurt. Cade Otton is great. Wide receivers playing, Otton disappears. Pat Freiermuth, kind of another example, kind of in that same vein. And I think we see that Ferguson is in that group. Ferguson is not really a weapon. Ferguson is just a part of the offense. And those types of tight ends tend to be overvalued. So this year, he has 57 catches, 482 yards, 82 targets, 4.4 catches, and 37.1 yards a game. 0 touchdowns. And fewer yards per game than in 2023. So he was terrible. A terrible fantasy pick for this year. If you picked him in redraft, he burned you. If you picked him in a dynasty startup, he's lost value. So he was a terrible pick this year if you picked him at whatever his valuation was. But why do I think it's going to be even worse? I think it's going to be even worse because we've seen a couple of things. Cowboys have no wide receiver too. Despite missing 3 games, Ferguson is still second on the Cowboys in targets behind CeeDee Lamb. Jalen Tolbert was the only wide receiver even to break 50 targets this year. And Brandon Cooks was injured for a lot of the year. And in 2023, Ferguson's season, which was basically the same as this year without touchdowns, it was the same thing. Brandon Cooks was the wide receiver 2 with just 81 targets. And there was no one else. So I don't think we can expect what's happened the last 2 years to continue again in 2025. The Cowboys can open up significant cap space with a Dak Prescott restructure. And wide receiver 2, honestly, is one of their biggest needs on the entire roster. Jalen Tolbert did not deliver. And Brandon Cooks is a free agent and probably won't be back. So they're going to make an effort to improve that spot, I think. And then on top of that, Ferguson's snap counts declined down the stretch, topping out at 60% over the final 3 weeks. He failed to top 40 yards over this period. He's never been relevant since returning from his latest injury. Really, just never did anything again. He's a fine player. Fine player. The Cowboys are going to probably extend him to a contract, but he's not and never will be a difference-making fantasy tight end. He's just another Cole Kmet, another Cade Otton. There is no difference between they are the same player. It's Dalton Schultz all over again on the same team, same player. We have so many versions of this player, and Jake Ferguson is just another one of them. So with that being said, I think his value is going to continue to go down, especially once the Cowboys add another wide receiver. So how do you sell him? Well, maybe you can still get a 20-25 second mid, potentially. I don't even know if you can get that. Could you sell him for Trey Benson? Maybe. People really hate Trey Benson. They've seen him do absolutely nothing. And James Conner got a contract extension. I'd probably rather take my chances on the running back than the chances that Jake Ferguson is ever going to be anything more than just a fill-in player. And then this last one, maybe you could do is like, could you use Jake Ferguson in like the 210 to get the 202? Like moving up in the draft now is often a smart thing to do. I think we're going to see that I'm going to do more sells content on the channel than buys because I'm not really that into buying players. But one of the things I'm going to focus on in buys is buying picks or moving up in picks, because now is the cheapest time to do so before we have the NFL Combine, before we have the rookie process, and people get more excited for what, as of now, I think by perception is not an exciting rookie class to most. So is this something you could do? Maybe. Just wanted to throw that out there. Now, I've got a couple of Patreon questions. We'll cover those and then wrap up the video. Are there any players we should consider trading for before free agency or the rookie draft? So typically, like I just said, I'm far more interested in selling players and buying draft picks, increasing my draft capital this time of year. Picks do not lose value. I also like buying 2026 picks because people say, oh, they're a year away. But then when we're in season, they're the next year's picks. They gain value by doing nothing from now until August. Buying players, there are some situations where I'm looking to do it, but that's not usually my focus. Typically, they're quarterbacks in Superflex with depressed value, maybe an impending free agent that I'm hoping hits a good destination. Darnell Mooney last year was a player I was looking to buy as a throw-in, and that kind of worked out. But it's situational. Buying players now is not exactly my focus. Now, I almost didn't understand this question, but I'll read it anyway. What is your thought process between choosing between one player with a high chance of booming or 2 to 3 players with a moderate chance of booming? Does the risk of injury play a factor? So like I said, I've never thought about this. This is a best ball or DFS thing. I don't focus on any of this. I focus on picking the players I have valued the most. We're not good at figuring out who's boom bust anyway. I mean, that's not something we're very good at. So for me, the one thing I will say about injuries is I don't care about a player who's injury prone. I don't believe in that. What I do care about is a player who is injured now. If a player is injured now, I am very unlikely to draft them in a dynasty startup. So Brandon Ayuk, probably not picking him in a dynasty startup because he's injured now. That has historically not worked. When you draft these players who have these big injuries, you usually we're better off not drafting them. So for me, those are the players I tend to avoid. I'm not focusing on injury risk of players who are currently healthy. That doesn't bother me. And injured now has to be a very severe injury. I do not consider Brock Purdy to be injured now, for example. That's not severe enough. It has to be something like Brandon Ayuk, that level of danger of missing week 1 to consider. Jonathan Brooks, Tank Dell. These are players who are injured now. Those are players I'm probably not picking. Last one. What are your thoughts on Jalen McMillan going into 2025? So Mike Evans is under contract. He'll be back. Chris Godwin's a free agent. What I don't think is happening is that Godwin walks and the Bucs do nothing to replace him. It's just Evans, McMillan, and no one else. Not happening. They're either going to bring back Godwin, use their first or second round pick on a wide receiver, or sign someone meaningful, but maybe not as good as Godwin to replace him. Maybe Amari Cooper, someone like that. But they're not going to just abandon that other wide receiver spot. McMillan this year, 12 games, 32 catches, 387 yards, 7 touchdowns, 52 targets. 7 touchdowns are exciting, but almost all of his production, including 6 of the touchdowns, came in the past 4 weeks. He had those 6 touchdowns and averaged 4.8 catches and 60.5 yards a game over that time. It's nice that he kind of ascended over K. Dotton as the second weapon behind Evans, so that's good. We're going to have to see what McMillan does in week 18 and in the playoffs if the Bucs make it. He's shown enough to be the wide receiver 3 next year, but it's just a question of, do they bring Godwin back, add a free agent like Amari Cooper, or do they draft someone, and whether McMillan can develop long-term. So I'm kind of on the fence, but he's definitely not a bust. He's going to be someone who could be relevant next year. So he's not going to drop into bust territory no matter what the Bucs do, because I do want to see what a player like this who flashed pretty significantly down the stretch does next year. It's kind of my overall thoughts of Jalen McMillan. Now, if you like the video, make sure to drop a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. As always, the best way to support the channel is to subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notifications bell so you can be notified about all my exciting content as it drops. Of course, if you want my best fantasy football advice, it's available on the Patreon. I do Dynasty content year round. You get a 50% discount on all tiers using the code TylerYT. It's also in the show description below. Every sign up helps support my independent content. Once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all